This episode contains rude words.
Hey lovely humans, this week we have Liz Zorab from Wales on with me. A lot of you would know of her name. We chat about her new property that she moved to, what it was like moving from her old property to her new one, her health conditions, how she's found farming on in Australia what we'd call a southern facing block, a very slopey block. Lots of challenges. Before we get too far into the episode, I just wanted to remind you all that Elle is sponsoring the podcast this season. She has some beautiful herbs on there for you to try. There's teas and tinctures. I spoke to her this week and her tincture bundles are such great value. She was explaining them to me, especially the small ones, because then you can try 3 of them and see if you like them, see how you use them, integrate them into your daily or weekly routine, and then that way if you like them you can get the bigger size and you don't kind of like you're wasting money getting a big one and you're not sure if you're actually going to like it or not. So she has 50ml tinctures and you can get 3 in a bundle pack, which saves you some money. So jump onto her website australianmedicinalherbs.com.au to have a little peruse of what's available. Welcome to the Practical Permaculture Podcast, your weekly dose of gardening, intentional living, and all things permaculture, served with a side of fun and plenty of great conversations. I'm your host, Elise, and together we'll dig into practical tips, chat with experts, and explore ways to cultivate a more abundant, sustainable life. Let's get growing.
Hello.
Hey, Jo. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
You're outside today.
I am. I'm in the green. Like, I've got this beautiful big lemon verbena. Like, this was literally nice. It was that big. It was tiny. Or for anyone listening, it was like, I don't know, maybe like 10 centimeters when I got it. It was tiny, and it has just gone crazy, as they do. Like, it's just, and it's so nice. Oh, it's maybe 2 years.
Oh, good. Mine's got open.
Yeah, they're so quick. They're so quick.
Mine was like
it's
a
tiny.
Little, tube stock kind of thing. I bought 2. One's probably knee height, but the other one's hip height. So
this one, it was started off really slow. And I was like, really nursing it through. And then all of a sudden it was just like, it took off.
Yeah, when I was there last time, it was flowering too. It was like beautiful.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's flowering a little bit. I don't know if you can see that a little bit there, but it's just sort of coming out of flower now. So, so I'm kind of surrounded. I've got grapevines above me. I've got, what have I got? Ginger, turmeric, strawberries, tomatoes popping up, Asian green. Oh, it's funny. I had Asian greens in the lawn underneath the washing line pop up. They just self-seeded in there because obviously they were seeded in the garden and they've exploded. We had to mow on Saturday, and I said to Aunt, right, that's it, before we mow, I've just got to go and dig these out. So I'm out there in my pajamas, which was literally like, underpants and t-shirt, digging these out and replanting them in the garden. So, because he's like, I want to get going before it gets too hot. And I'm like, no, I've got to save them. Got another brown snake that's living in the garden, so that's fun. Every time we go to harvest, I walk around, I feel like I'm, like out of Lord of the Rings. I'm walking around with this big shovel, like a big staff type thing. Going, okay, I'm coming into the garden. You need to leave now.
Yeah.
So we just have to be really mindful up there at the moment.
Does he bother the chickens or the ducks or anything?
No,
or is
no, he goes looking for eggs. He was the one I think that was hanging around in the duck coop and looking for eggs. So we just make sure that we collect eggs morning and evening.
Yeah. I went on a garden tour this weekend. We have like a Gulmarad gardening crew. Then we rotate each month or so and go visit someone's garden and have a little morning tea. And they had these big long snake beans. So I got some beans off her, which was cool. Because I've never grown them or eaten them really. I just growed the normal green beans. So I got some of her and I gave her some of our seeds. We had all of our tiger eye marigolds are all drying up, so I collected some of those and some cucamelons, and I went and dropped some stuff off for her and then got some snake bean seeds, so I'm going to grow those. And the first season we got here, I really tried to grow some borlotti beans and some beans for soups and to dry and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, we didn't have much luck with the weather and new soil and all that kind of thing. So I really want to make a big effort this year to get some beans in the ground not just like for eating, but for drying and for
drying,
preserving for winter. Yeah. Because I spoke with Phil Dudman and he was like at me, like, you got to get your winter stuff in now. Because I said to him, I'm really like struggling that the crops aren't ready when I think they're going to be ready. And he's like, it's a different climate and like you've got to get it in a bit earlier. And we don't have a very big cold season here. So because he's at Lismore, so he kind of is in the same climate and he was kind of coaching me through it a little bit. So I've got all of our, I went and got some of our local made compost because our compost isn't ready. I'm just going to mix it with a little bit of coconut husk or something to just thin it out and make it stretch a bit further.
Yeah.
Or the local nursery said some coarse sand as well. Just mix it with some coarse sand to make it go further. So I'll probably make a little mix up with that. And I'm going to plant this week all of our winter veg. But my battle here will be making sure it doesn't bolt before winter comes. So it's
it's finding that
fine line between the hot weather and then because we don't have a very big cool season to get them in but not let them bolt. So I've got to try and find somewhere that's a bit shady or rig up some shade cloth and somewhere where they're not going to get eaten by the animals that are around. So that's my kind of thing this week, to do that.
It's like
and the weekend we started doing some edging. So there's a lot of running grass that we're kind of not winning the battle. So I've just gotten from work a whole heap of cardboard again to put on top, and then some more. We've got 4 big piles of mulch we need to get rid of. So we're re-cardboarding, remulching, and we've got some edging. So we've got a mix of logs, some plastic edging from Bunnings that we got just because it's on the outside of our fence, so it doesn't need to be decorative, but we don't want it to break down like the sticks and logs will over time.
You want something a bit more permanent. Yeah.
And then at the back on our food hedges, we're starting to grow comfrey. So we're just going to try and have a hard border with a shovel to keep the grass back, and then just wait till the comfrey gets bigger, and hopefully that'll be enough. So
it certainly will be. Yeah, I've done the same thing with like we've got like a fenced garden bed, and just along the outside of the fence, because we were getting grass running in from the path, like just bits of random grass coming in, runner grass. I've done comfrey along there, and where the comfrey is super thick, nothing's getting through, and the other side's great. I can just just stay on top of the grass that had already come through, and I'm starting to win the battle on that. But I can see now where it's a little bit thin with the comfrey, and I'm like, I just need to get in there and disturb it a bit more so it keeps reshooting. You can see where it's actually getting through. So it works a treat.
Good. That's awesome. So if I can get on top of it now, I feel like then winter will come, the grass won't be so aggressive, and by the time spring comes, I'm not going to be overwhelmed with the grass. So that's kind of my goal. And we've done a bit of reflecting over the summer as well. Like I know we spoke last year about how summer gardening, our perceptions have like shifted a little bit and what that means and what gardening in the summer looks like. And so we've kind of said that for us, summer's going to be maintenance. So we're going to keep the garden going, but we said no projects next summer, no big jobs, nothing like that. Summer will purely be like mowing and maintenance because it's just not the season to be
doing
much.
That.
We've got some projects we were planning on getting done. I'll get out there early in the morning and blah, blah, blah. But it's just too hot by 8 o'clock and
unless you're going to be getting up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and be under lights, even then, last night it wasn't hot, but it was so steamy,
sticky,
and it's it zaps your energy. I mean, we mowed on Saturday, and because we had friends coming over, it was like Olympic racing mowing. I was on the rider, and I was like nearly getting air, I think, on some of the little hills. I was like, let's just get this done, and then ants on the push mower and the whippersnapper and. Both of us, by the time our friends got here, we were just like just absolutely spent. And that was just 2 hours. Yeah. It didn't take long at all, but
and like with a project, you have 2 hours and it's like you're just getting into it and then it's time to pack up and then you got a half-finished project for the next weekend. I just don't like that either. Like we moved our little lawn locker and it's still not finished after a couple of weekends because it's you only get an hour and a half, 2 hours before it's too hot. And we want to go to the beach with the kids in the morning because the middle of the day is too hot and the afternoon's windy. So, we've kind of resolved ourselves that we try and get our projects done autumn, winter, spring, and then summer's a rest period for projects, and it's purely just enjoying the garden and maintenance. So,
we've come to that same conclusion as well. And it was a bit more around, not so much even like, yours is you want to spend that time with the kids as well and enjoy that. Ours is just our bodies just can't keep up with it. Like we just physically can't be smashing ourselves every weekend in 35 plus degree heat and huge humidity. So we're very much the same now. It's just we can do like we'll maybe do like little fun projects that we can do, but it's basically just maintenance.
Yeah. So that's kind of it for us in the garden, I think. My little update. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I reckon we get into today's episode. Hello, how are you, Liz?
I'm really good, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're most welcome. I'm very excited to talk to you. So we've got Liz Zorab on today to talk to us. Do you want to tell us a bit about you and your context over in Wales?
Yeah, so I've lived in Wales for about 25 years now in various different sites. I've been here for the last 3 years, and here is Carmarthenshire, and I am on a north-facing site, which means for us it's the cold, bleak side of the hill, and 3/4 of the way up a mountain. So it is cold, it's wet, it's windy. We're in the middle of a wind farm, and on quite a slope. We're also in an area that has a huge amount of rain, and I did actually check the rainfall recently, and in 2024 we had just over 84 inches of rain over the year, which is about half as much again as we usually have. So it's been a really wet year. And prior to that, I lived in Monmouthshire, and I was on a 8/10 of an acre site, and that's where I really started exploring permaculture as a way of growing and as a way of life and a way of approaching life.
So did you specifically choose that site up a hill on a north-facing, south for Australia, facing block, or was that just what was available? Or
it was what was available.
Yeah,
so we had sold our previous home, and we were desperately trying to find a new site. And we always just say this was the least worst. So as a choice, I would have had a flat. I would have very similar. In fact, I would have picked up my old place and moved it away. And one of the reasons we moved is that we were right down on the River Severn, which is the longest river in the UK. It's also a tidal river, and actually it was a lovely area. But we were in between two bridges spanning the river. But what that actually meant is we were in between two motorways. And if you make videos for a living, having the constant noise of the traffic, and the more traffic went on, the more there were, the more building there was, it just got louder and louder. And eventually I just said, you know what, I don't think I can cope with this constant noise anymore. Can we move? So we kind of went, don't know. But we did manage to sell our place fairly quickly after putting it on the market, and then our buyers were pushing quite quickly to, have you found somewhere? They told us they'd taken 2 years to find something as lovely as our place. And after 8 weeks said, haven't you found anything yet?
Hurry up.
And I get it, they were itching to get in. And so this kind of ticked enough boxes. We wanted a small house because that means, that the upkeep is easy, the running costs are low, there are only 2 of us, so seriously, how much space do we need? And the more space you've got, the more you just fill it with stuff.
True.
And
so
stuff
true.
just, stuff is just stuff. We don't need all that much stuff, really. So we found a smallish house, and we found 4.5 acres. With the potential to be able to rent a further 6.5, which in the end we chose not to do.
Okay.
So we're on 4.5 acres and a small house, and interesting growing conditions.
Yeah. So what kind of climate are you looking at? That you'll get frosts, obviously, and snow in winter.
We get frosts. We do get a bit of snow, but we're talking maybe 3 or 4 inches of snow, and it lasts for 3 or 4 days. We're not snowed in, so it's a sort of oceanic temperate climate. So there's lots of rain. It's never very hot. It's never if I say it's never really cold, we're in the middle of winter, and that's like tempting fate. So probably in the last 40 years, we've had 2, 3, maybe 4 winters where it's got down to minus 18 Celsius for a week or so at a time. But usually it's around, if we get down to minus 5, we're all going, oh, gosh, it's really cold, what's going on? So most of the winter is around somewhere between 5 degrees and minus 3.
Sure.
We have long springs, which are cool and wet. We have long autumns, which are getting cooler. As the summer ends, getting cooler. But we very distinctly have 4 seasons, and there's winter, which is cold and wet, autumn, which is cool and wet, summer, which is wet, and spring, which is wet. There's quite a high rainfall, and when we don't have rain, if we don't have rain for 3 weeks, we're all going, is it a drought? Is it a drought? Because we're not geared up.
Yes.
Certainly on the west side of the UK, we are not geared up for very dry weather. But it means that we can grow this amazing array of plants, from Mediterranean through to really quite cold-loving things that will stand through the winter. Yep. It doesn't freeze so much that you can't dig things out of the ground. Maybe for the few days it's frozen, but it's going to defrost in a few days, and then you can dig things out of the ground. Yeah. So we can literally harvest from the garden all year round. And using polytunnels and greenhouses, we can almost grow, we can now grow some citrus fruit as well. So it's like a really broad range of food that we can grow, and a broad range of ornamentals as well.
Yeah. And does the wind affect you much, being on the hillside and near a wind farm then?
Well, the UK is really quite a small place. It's really not very wide across. So it is always a bit windy. Okay. But because of where we are, so the UK is far enough north that it's level with Moscow in Canada. It's really far north. But we have the Gulf Stream. So coming from the Gulf of Mexico across the Atlantic, there's this warm water stream, which then brings with it warm air. Yep. So although in theory it should be very cold here, it's not, because because we've got a lot of shoreline, and B, because there is this warm air coming through. It's not tropical warm. It's not warm like you get in Barbados or so. But it's warm enough to stop it getting very cold here. So it's nice. It doesn't get too hot, and it doesn't get too cold. And it is, when I say it's rainy, it's not like a monsoon. We just get a small amount of rain not every day, but there's not many weeks where we don't get very much rain on this bit of our hill. Lots of the UK will go weeks without rain, but not here.
I would have expected it to be a lot colder, like when you're saying that's where it is, up north. But that's very interesting. Yeah. And so rewind a little bit, going back to how you discovered permaculture, or even discovered gardening, which came first, and how that journey unfolded. Gardening
came first. I got my love of plants from my father when I was younger than 3 years old, and he taught me how to squeeze the flower of a snapdragon, an antirrhinum, and it would open, and it was like. So I then went round the corner and I popped all the flowers, not just the antirrhinums, all my dad's prized beautiful fuchsias and everything. Popped all of those open with my small squeezy hands, and I can remember him having to teach me that not all plants are equal and not all of them can be squeezed. So that, very early on, and then I think I probably had like a small area that they gave me to sow some lettuce seeds and things as a younger child. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really get into gardening as such until I left home and got my first, I was in rented property, but my first garden of my own, as it were. And in that garden, I cultivated the most amazing amount of weeds. And And like there'll be like a few flowers in between this bindweed, which is, you know, convolvulus, like twisting up, strangling every other plant. But I didn't care. It was green, it was beautiful, and it was lush. And then there were these lovely flowers, which of course spread the weeds even further. But just in my mind, it was just wonderful to have this outdoor space to explore. And so I started gardening properly when I was about 21. And mostly it was mostly ornamental gardening. And then as time went on, I did little bits of food and things. And then about 10 years ago, oh, good grief, yes, about 10 years ago, I started getting quite ill, and to the point where I had to stop working, and I ended up in bed for about 4 months, just not being able to sleeping all the time. And my thyroid had started dysfunctioning, but it had been going slowly for so long, I hadn't actually been processing enough vitamins and minerals. So I was actually suffering from malnutrition or undernutrition. I mean, you know, it was a few trips in ambulances to the hospital thing because my heart wasn't doing what it should be doing. So it was really scary, really frightening. And during that time, we were also looking for to buy our first property together, my husband and I. And and I wanted a small cottage with a garden big enough to grow some food, some nice flowers and some food. And once I realised that actually I was probably never going to be going back to work in the conventional 9 to 5 sense, I said to him, how about as my contribution to the family income, I stay at home and I grow and produce as much of our food as possible, which means we don't need 2 cars. I don't need to buy work clothes. We're not going to be buying lunches at, you know, work lunchtime food and all of that. So like my outgoings would come down. And it also meant that I could work around not being 100% well.
Yeah.
So we found a house, we moved there. I was using walking sticks to get around, and I just did this kind of thing. I can remember when we bought the house, we woke up in the morning and I went, well, I need to get up and do this thing now. You know, I've said I'm going to do it. And I hobbled around on walking sticks, pushing a wheelbarrow a bit and then walking sticks, but I did it. And so we had bought 3/4 of an acre, just a blank field, really. So I could do whatever I wanted to do on it. And obviously the first thing I did was build a compost heap and then stand looking at this field going, what do I do now? And so I did lots and lots of things, and I'd done lots of reading, and I was watching things on YouTube. And I slowly went, that's how I garden. Oh, I do that. And I started putting all these things together, and then discovered that there was a name for lots and lots of the things I was doing, and it was permaculture. And at that point, it was just like light bulbs going off all over the place. It was like, yes, I kind of get this now. And so I read more and I watched more. So I kind of developed my knowledge that way, but actually through acknowledging that actually I already do lots of those practices because they felt right. They made sense and they felt right. And then finding kind of permaculture teachings just joined all the dots together for me and filled in a few blanks.
Oh, how lovely.
So it wasn't as mind-blowing as not knowing anything about it and going in to do a PDC. When we were talking a bit earlier on about, you know, doing an intensive 2-week PDC and how that must just make your brain almost explode with information. Yeah. And I was in that lucky position where I was doing things and I knew they worked. And then I started getting the theory behind why they worked. So that it was almost the other way around. Which was really nice to be able to kind of go, yes, that makes sense. Yes, I didn't know why I did things that way. It was just like, oh, that works. Yes. And once I got the theory of why it worked, it was like, yay. Yeah. That's you know, it was good.
It's been so confirming of what you already knew and what you were already doing by you know, having that theory then to back it.
Yes, and also taking lots of other ideas and building on what I was already doing. And it was like, you know, so, you know, that whole stacking functions concept, I would multitask and I would make everything do more But then when I thought about it and I learned about it, it was like, okay, now let's actually look at this. What more can I make each of these things do? How more efficient can I make my day?
Yeah.
How much more can I make all these things work together and build these links? So it was taking what I already did and actually making it far more efficient, far more effective, and far easier to use in the garden.
Yeah, I think so many people would resonate with that story, because I feel like a lot of people come to permaculture because they either want to grow better vegetables and then they realize that permaculture is a lot more than just growing vegetables, or they have some kind of crisis, like a health crisis or a big event in their life that leads them down that path of self-discovery a little bit. And so how did you find that process, like being unwell and trying to push through, and also needing to respect, I guess, your body and your boundaries?
It was interesting because the land we'd bought was in such poor condition. So when we first went there, I dug 3 holes across it, and I kind of found like 2 or 3 worms. I mean, it was just like this land was lifeless. And as I worked with the land and I helped improve the soil, and because it was a time thing, I was improving, the soil was improving, the we were producing in the garden was improving, and so which affected which, I don't know. I was able to do more, so I grew more food. It had higher nutrients in it, which helped me get better. So it was a really circular thing. I think the thing that I learned most of all is that none of it's a quick process. So it was accepting this isn't going to be a quick fix. But after probably 3 years, it was like, wow, we are producing so much of our own really good quality food. At that point I knew I never wanted to go back to a 9-to-5 job. And I don't, and I didn't really want to be eating highly processed mass produced food.
Yes.
Of course, I like a lot of highly processed mass-produced food. I mean,
don't we all? If only we could grow chocolate on a tree. Or a margarita.
So, it's not, and I do eat them, it's not that I don't, but I try and ensure that something, the majority actually of what we're eating is clean as opposed to highly processed.
Yes. And so you've got a book called Grounded that came out in 2021, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And so that's about your journey to abundance and self-sufficiency. So what is your take on self-sufficiency? Because there's a bit of pushback at the moment about the word self-sufficiency and what it means, and do we go towards community sufficiency? Like, what's your kind of take on that?
I've had quite a lot of conversations with my husband about this, because I sort of said about being self-sufficient and things, and the phrase that he used is self-efficient, which I really like. It's that idea of being as efficient as you can with the space that you've got. Yes. So to me, self-sufficiency is always going to be different for different people, and it could just be that you are self-sufficient in 2 or 3 herbs that you use on a regular basis. Or it could be that you've gone down the route of being off-grid, producing your own power, producing your own heating, growing most of your own food, and creating clothing from it could be anything from flax to wool, or whatever it is you're doing. But I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's more a case of finding a level that's comfortable for you.
Yes.
And for us, it was about enabling my husband to work part-time, for me to be able to work at home and work seasonally, so that neither of us felt the pressure. I mean, I've got to caveat all of this by saying we're in the really fortunate position that we don't have a huge mortgage to pay.
Yeah.
Because we're of an age that we've done that bit. So it's allowed us the comfort and the privilege of being able to say time together, or time is more important than money, and that we would rather we would rather enjoy our time together. So for us, it's about finding a level, finding a balance between producing food and I don't like to use the word working in the garden, but working in the garden, and having not feeling exhausted all the time. So it's about finding a balance, and I'm not sure that any of us should prescribe for somebody else what's right for them. I think everybody can go, I'm self-sufficient to the level that I want to be, or I don't want to be. I just want to top up.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to ever buy any supermarket lettuce or cabbages because I know they're sprayed with a load of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm going to grow my own. And I don't know. I think people can get very hung up on labels. I think, you know, including me, we get very hung up on this label of, you know, self-sufficiency, or, you know, it's all organic or beyond organic, or, you know, I think we need to be a bit kinder to ourselves.
Yeah.
And and not say I need to do. You know, there's plenty of we need to do's in this life. I think that choosing what you do with your time, which is, you know, a precious resource. It's a precious thing to have. And choosing what to do with it should be up to individuals, whether that is pottering in the garden, which my husband would consider out and out work and the worst thing. It just doesn't do it for him at all.
Yeah.
You know, he does other things, and that's absolutely fine. So, you know, whether it's you're pottering in the garden or you're doing those other things, what you choose to do with your time, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is that sliding scale of self-sufficiency, and I had a conversation with a past guest, and she was dead set that, you know, you cannot be self-sufficient because you have to go to the, you know, big chain stores to buy things. So then just that fact alone meant you couldn't be self-sufficient. And I think people do get too rigid on what that definition is, and I think it's also discouraging for people who want to give things a go, and they, you know, you can get let down by that. Well, you know, you can't be this or have that because of this reason.
It's I mean, I think if you set that really rigid boundary for yourself, that's fine. But it's the for yourself bit.
Yes.
I think is possibly the important one.
Yeah.
It's about recognising what works for you.
Yeah. And so what did you find most challenging about moving to your new property? Because you would have been in a very different place, health-wise and mentally, I guess, as well, going to your second property. But obviously starting with a fairly blank slate again. Was it kind of sad leaving that all behind? And how did you plan for it?
It wasn't sad leaving it all behind at all, because I was just very excited about the next thing.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, you know, that somebody else owns that space now. Mm-hmm. It's not mine anymore, so there's no point in thinking about it. So I just literally cut off. However, since then, I have got kind of quite a, I'd really like a flat place. Because I think one of the hard things here is when I step outside my front door, our house is semi-sunken into the ground.
Uh-huh.
So you immediately have to go up a load of steps. So the light isn't the same in the house here as it was at our last house. But also the zones. So where you would kind of go, well, let's have the garden really near, I have to walk 100 and something metres to get to the garden, which means when you go, oh, I haven't got any chives, and you want to just pop out, you can't just stick your slippers on and run out to the garden and avoid the muddy bits. You have to actually seriously put on wellies, walk up the hill. There's a lot of rabbits here, which we didn't have in the last place, so that's quite a challenge. But then you have to go through the rabbit-proof fencing and various different barriers to get into the garden, and you know, as you go around the corner it gets much windier, so actually it's not as convenient, and which means I probably go out there less. So that's the thing I think I miss the most. And the back garden that's right by the house, when we moved in, was about 6 foot high with brambles and weeds.
Wow.
It was a really a no-go zone, no-go area for 2.5 years. Just constantly cutting stuff back, and my priority had to be getting, trees in and getting food in the main part of the garden, and not to worry about this chaos just outside the back door. And this year we have finally got most of the weeds under control, and so in the next year I'll be moving my herb garden down there. And so suddenly that will become, zone 1, and it will be better.
Yes.
But still, the the area that I had thought would be a veg garden, I started planting that very soon after we moved in, because it was like we moved in at the end of June, I think it was. It's like, I really need to get something into the ground so that we've got some food growing for the winter. And so I can harvest to get us through the winter. So I did that, and the ground was awful. It was like, oh my God, this is even worse than the previous house. What's going on here? And also, it was absolutely full of horseflies. So every time you went down there, you were getting bitten really badly.
Oh no!
It was like, I don't want to be gardening in this. And then we planted our first tree uphill a little bit, and the soil was rich and dark and beautiful and fine and crumbly and just wonderful. And I just said, so I'm going to have to walk a bit further, but I'm going to move the vegetable garden uphill into this wonderful soil, because just what's the point of fighting ground that that is very poor? It was very shallow. I mean, it was like maybe that much. I'm waving my hands around, about a couple of inches of soil, and then an awful lot of slate rock underneath it. Whereas up the hill, just another 30 metres higher up, you could get 18 inches, 2 feet. So where are we? That's 45 centimetres to 60 centimetres of rich, deep, beautiful topsoil. I mean, it was a huge amount. Partly because the previous owner had horses on here. And in fact, I think several owners had horses and sheep. So the ground it just built this most wonderful layer of incredibly rich, nutritious soil. Actually chock-a-block with worms. I mean, it was almost the opposite of where I'd first tried to grow, and certainly the opposite of what we'd had in our old place when we'd moved in there. So I now garden about just over an acre of land, and that's 250 square metres of traditional raised bed vegetable gardens. And I do them in raised beds to compensate for the hill. So the beds are shallower on one side and deeper on the other. So the beds are level even though we're on a slope. And then there's a kind of very quite traditional orchard, which has literally just got the fruit trees and grass, which our ducks were going to be just free ranging in that area, which they did for a year or so until foxes came and took them. And then we got more ducks, and then the foxes came and took them again. And I just said, that's it. We're not having free range ducks because all I'm doing is feeding the local foxes.
Yeah.
So there's issues that come with not having the ducks, because they were my slug detectives. So, this year, the last year has been interesting growing without any slug protection. It's another story.
Yeah, especially in the wet.
Yes.
In the rain.
But everybody, I'm not the only one. Everyone has suffered with a huge amount of slugs in the last 12 months. And then the other, just over half an acre, is a food forest, but I'm doing it as a linear food forest. So you kind of, it would almost look like silver pasture, but it's very much a linear food forest. So the beds go not quite north-south, but nearly, rather than east-west, not quite north-south. And I wanted something that the planting was far enough apart that you didn't damage yourself when you walked around. So in our old place, I'd actually planted things far too closely together. So you kind of, as things grew, and they grew very quickly, as I had moved out the way of a cherry tree so I didn't get that, in my face, I would suddenly find that there was a bit of wild rose catching my face, which was, it was a bad move to get, you either get poked in the eye with a stick or you get brambles in thorns in your face. So that was a lesson that I took with me. It was like, actually, I need to plant everything further apart.
Yes.
And because our light levels are much lower than they are in Australia, we actually need to plant things a bit further apart anyway.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, you can plant things very close together, and there is that wonderful thing of trees growing very rapidly and creating woodland very quickly. But if you want to grow a whole range of stuff, and I have a real thing of combining ornamentals and edibles together. So not edimentals, not ornamentals that you can eat. These are just because ornamentals are my first love in gardening. I wanted to create a forest garden that was also an ornamental garden, if that makes sense.
Beautiful.
So I went, okay, so along this 17-metre strip, so it's like 17 metres by 2 metres wide, I would put in 3 or 4 apple trees or fruit trees down the length of it, and then underplants with ornamentals. There are herbs in there, there are some edibles in there, but the majority of it is just ornamental, because I want to go into that area and I just want to lift my spirits. I just want yes, this is so beautiful.
Yes. I think aesthetics are so important in permaculture gardens. It makes you want to be out there and engage and be a part of it all. What are some of your favourite ornamentals that you've planted in there?
So I've planted a rose arch.
Oh, beautiful.
So I went to a company who make polytunnels and said to them, could we design a rose arch? So rather than it just being a metal loop, a hoop that you would stretch plastic over, it's got 2 lots of supports down the sides, the whole length, as well as the top one, which meant you've got more to tie your roses into, and it also makes it a bit more stable. So bless them, they created that for me. So that's 10 feet wide, 48 feet long. I'm sorry, I can't do that into metric.
Wow. That's okay. That's beautiful.
And it's just, so it's got climbing roses going up it. We're only sort of in year 3 now, but they are starting to climb. And then there are roses all in front of it. So I absolutely love roses. And I can justify having every rose on the planet in my garden. I love them as flowers. I love the scent. I use the rose hips for making wines and jellies.
Oh, beautiful.
There is nothing about a rose I don't like, so apart from the thorns. And I just put up with those to have all that, everything else.
It's worth
but
it.
I like absolutely classic cottage plants. So I like roses, peonies. I think the only flower, I'm just going to say I like most plants. What I don't like are things that are really gaudy in colour, really, really bright colours, but even those I like in the right context.
Yes, yeah. I've just gotten addicted to dahlias. I've just bought a whole heap that have gone in this summer. But my favourite thing are peonies, but I can't really grow them here in my climate. It's just not cold enough. But they're gorgeous. They're one of my favourite flowers. Lives in Croatia, and she sends me photos, and they're as nearly as big as her head. They're massive. Yeah. Then compared to what we can grow in Australia, they just look so hopeless over here compared to those ones you get in Europe.
But then, you have different things there, don't you?
Yes, true. Very true. Yeah. Well, we've just bought an acre, or just over an acre here in Australia, and I wanted to talk to you about that concept of, in permaculture, waiting a whole, or 12 months to see all the seasons versus just getting in there and getting some stuff done, because it's really tricky when you want to.
Did you hear that deep sigh then?
But I want to get roots in the ground. I want to get veggies in the ground. I'm sure I'm going to change my mind, and that will be a bit of a setback. But you know what? I just want some veggies in the ground.
I have a kind of feeling that with the whole thing of it has to be right for you. If you want to grow straight away, grow straight away. You know, absolutely. And if you've just bought a chunk of land, you haven't just bought somebody else's garden. If I moved into an existing garden, I might not wait a year, because I would probably create new beds to grow in whilst I was watching what else was going on in the garden, whilst I was waiting to see what hidden gems were in the ground and were going to appear during the year. But in terms of just getting in there and getting something done, no, I'd start straight away. I would, but it might not be, you know, I might create in a raised bed, you know, I might just use cardboard box raised beds and just literally throw cardboard boxes on the ground, fill them with compost and start growing in them straight away, because if next year you can always change it all around. I wouldn't, by the way, I would just leave them where they are. But you could, should you want to. And the other thing is that we work on the basis of absolutely nothing is permanent.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, we have always put fences in up until we got here, and we had to put rabbit fencing in. We've just used netting fences and ones that we, you know, flexi netting for chickens, and just go, well, we can move them. You know, we can move them as we learn and as our needs change. Because certainly, you know, in the old place, from the beginning to the end of the 5.5 years there, our needs were very different. We were exploring and learning about having chickens and ducks to begin with, and we did that inevitable thing of buying an incubator and hatching a ridiculous number of chickens. I mean, huge number of chickens and ducks, and it was like, and then it took a couple of years to actually to sell them on and to eat them, and to go kind of actually. We don't need 120 chickens, because the cost of feeding them is phenomenal. And so we didn't need to have so much space. But what it had meant is we'd had all those chickens dropping their droppings all over the ground, and now we had really fertile soil. So our needs changed. So, you know, for a couple of years we had chickens in a space, then we reduced the number of chickens, and then we could grow food there. And then I added a flower garden as well. And it's that thing of being flexible, of accepting not everything is permanent. That it's okay. I think it's completely okay. And it is that permaculture idea of observing and adjusting and observing and adjusting, so that you can keep on tweaking things till they're right, or until you just want to change.
And you know what? I think it's actually accelerated my learning, because putting things in the wrong spot has taught me so much about my block and where the sun is. Like, we put some garlic in, and it was definitely the wrong spot for garlic, because winter came and it was in complete shade the whole of winter. But I know that now, and if I didn't put garlic there, I probably wouldn't have paid that much attention to that spot in the garden. And so, I think it has accelerated our learning, and we've made a ton of mistakes from the first 6 months of being here. There's definitely things will change. And all of our big structures we've left. So we didn't want to make any permanent decisions about big structures and things that were going to be expensive. And like you said, we've just mounded up some soil and put some raised beds in with corrugated iron, because we can pick that up and move it. It's not permanent. And it's a couple hours work in the garden. But so I love that you have that belief too, to just get in there and start and get out there.
You know, if we had bought a garden that somebody had already created, yes, I would want to see what was in there. But if you've bought an empty, or effectively an empty block or lot, then if you know that it's just had farm animals on it for the last 10, 15 years, then probably what you've got is either a pile of manure somewhere, or some very lovely soil. It's the answer is just to give it a go and try. But yes, you need to see which way where the sun goes at which time of year. And it was fairly easy for us to do that, because when we first looked, it was winter, and by the time we actually managed to move in, it was summer, so we could easily kind of track the arc of the sun. It's not very difficult to tell which way the wind goes, because your hair just And the thing that I've learned is that most of the year the wind goes in one direction, and then for a little bit of the year it goes in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And I actually, when I planted the trees, I planted all of the trees about a 45-degree angle, facing into the prevailing
I should
wind.
have done that, because currently all my trees I planted straight and they're on a lean, because we've got cleared land either side of us where people will build eventually, but we're so exposed, and my poor trees, I need to go stake all of them and try and correct their growing habits now because they're all in a lean.
Yeah, well, my theory was, I mean, it hasn't worked yet. So come back in 5 years and ask me if it works. But the idea was, if I plant them into the prevailing wind, then as the wind pushes them, it should push them upright. It may well push them over the other way as well, but what I'm hoping is it will push them upright, and at that point they'll be established enough to not lean too much.
Yeah.
And learning where water goes, that just takes time. That's I don't even think that that's necessarily a 1 year thing.
So true. And the changes that you make with perhaps planting orchards and all the impacts you have along the way is going to change the way that water flows on your property anyway.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And our neighbours who built on a field, all of a sudden the volume of water that we've got coming down the hill from their land, that changed. There was suddenly a lot more water, and we kind of went, oh, where did this all come from? And it was like, oh, okay, yeah, they've put in concrete footings for buildings, and so the water's not being absorbed up there, it's just coming down the hill more.
We're coming up to the end of our chat now, and I was just wondering if I could ask you one final question, which is, if someone was just starting out on their permaculture journey, what advice would you give them?
Oh, okay. So dream big, start small.
Yes.
So have a grand plan that's flexible, but don't try and do everything at once, because it just becomes, it's too much. So start really small. Start small with your initial plan, bearing in mind the whole thing. But when you get down to the detail, start small. Only do a bit that you can. Keep your back to what still needs to be done, so that you're only looking at what you've already achieved, and you're not going, oh, but there's all this stuff I haven't achieved.
Yeah.
You're just looking at what's already a success.
Yeah.
And don't compare. So comparison is a killer. It's terrible. It's so demoralizing. Don't compare what you're doing to what someone else is doing, because what you're doing is for you, and it's going to be right for your garden in the way that you want to do it.
Oh, I love that. And I really struggle with that, like just wanting everything to be done and bigger and, grow a bit higher and have all the projects going. But it's so important to do one thing at a time. And I think adding to that too is like to take photos as well, because how the iPhones give you memories that come up from like this, last year, this is what it looked like. And I was feeling very disheartened the other day about our property, and that we haven't had time, and we had some people house sitting, and a lot of our things died because it was very, very hot and it didn't get watered properly, and I was feeling very down about it. And then this memory popped up, and I saw what the property was like 6 months ago, and I just thought, wow, like we have come such a long way, and it's very easy to forget how far you've come and what you have achieved. So I think that's really important to remind yourself of that too.
Yeah, documenting it one way or another is a really good idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been so lovely chatting to you. I'll put all the links to your YouTube and your books and your social media and everything on the show notes. So if anybody wants to connect with you and see what you're up to, they can. Have you got any big projects coming up in your land at the moment?
So I'm going to just use my phrase, my favourite phrase, which is more of the same but different.
Oh, lovely. Getting that back herb patch planted out by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's the next project. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.